Greetings, YouTube friends. Today is Monday, April 20th, 2026. And today I'm very excited to be joined by my friend Dale from TradeGate Hub. And we are going to explore the Iran-Israel conflict in all different ways. Dale has excellent insights on just following the fundamentals and the markets associated with the event. And I have taken a look at some of the astrology charts associated with the event. And then we're going to unpack some other interesting financial market and news-related events, like the most recent executive order associated to psychedelic drugs. And yeah, just check out what's going on with this massive V-shaped recovery in the U.S. equity markets and see what we think is next.
Yeah, I'm already seeing trails, Margo. But great to be with you. And every trade is binary based upon what's happening overseas. My gut instinct tells me that there's going to be at least one more round of intense kinetic action, and I don't rule out boots on the ground. So I do think there's going to be one more attempt before President Trump goes to China to, use power to try and open up the straits. So, and a very interesting day, which you pinpointed on our panel at the beginning of the month, about April 17th, which may have turned out to be the low in the dollar.
Yep.
And perhaps maybe a short-term top in risk for a correction as things deteriorate again in the Middle East.
Yeah, I definitely think, so far the timing has really been spot on. We got, when we talked in the April episode of Astro TA Macro, and listeners, if you're not familiar with that, I posted the highlighted video on my channel, where I get to have the opportunity to talk to people from different disciplines. Dale's there, and then we've got a macroeconomist and another astro trader. And I was looking for that pivot low to manifest within a week of the equinox. And that was what we got. That was with precision. I wasn't expecting a V-shaped rally quite as strong as it was, but wow, it's been impressive.
I think we're entering the highly speculative phase of the market when you have an impulse move like that. That how you have to trade it is wait or hope for a correction, some type of fib pullback. S&Ps, I'm thinking maybe back to 6,800 would be a good entry. I wouldn't chase things up here, but it does portend that this could be the final. This could be 5. I don't know how long it's going to take to complete, but 7,800's now looking like a conservative target. And that would just be a measured move from the old highs at 7 and the pullback to 6,300. So I see it this way, that all the biggest moves are made at the final stages, and I think that was a precursor of what we're going to see.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm going to screen share so the viewers can check out the ES chart or the S&P chart if they're not familiar with it. Here's the S&P 500. So this is our move straight up, and the cash index, the SPY, has made significant new highs, trading right now at looks like 706. So I think what Dale was talking about was if we once this high comes in, right, then we could look for, I use fibs a lot. So I look for the different fib retracements. If we get anything back to the 382, let's see, I'm going to get.
Exactly. It should be shallow.
Yeah.
And more of a time correction than a price correction, because everyone now wants to buy a break that's been left behind. I don't think they're going to see 61.8. It'd be too convenient. And then I might become a little skeptical if it's steep.
Well, if it's steep, then we have the capacity to set up a range, which, a lot of my analogs indicate, if we take a look at, let's see, I don't know if I have that one open. If we take a look at the weekly, here we go. you can see this. I actually like this green analog is kind of my forecast. I think we might get a couple weeks of consolidation. So we'll see. But yeah, ideally it's going to hold above the 382. And then we could see some continuation. But we're definitely in late stage cycle behavior.
Yeah.
So that's definitely there's big moves to be made. And my primary outlook is that we're going to top out in the summer. Certainly,
July.
yeah, June, July, could be early August, but the eclipse season in August looks really rough. And that's kind of, it's like the beginning of a lot of more volatile astro that comes in. We've got the eclipse season in mid-August, and then followed by a dual retrograde period of Venus and Mercury in the sign of Scorpio. And Venus retrograde periods are one of the most reliable signals in astro that correlate to periods of weakness in the US equity markets. So
Okay.
I definitely see a
maybe
drop.
that's also when we get lows in precious metals. I still remain negative on them, and should silver take out 78 is a very important pivot. I know a lot of people are still long looking for over 120 right away, and I don't see it. There's a very key level at 78. I could always share my chart and show it, but
Yeah. Why don't you share your chart, Dale?
okay, because sometimes you see on short-term charts what you don't notice on long-term charts, and I just want to give our viewers kind of an example. Okay, so we're getting a nice little pullback in. This is a 3 drive to a top on Micron,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I want to just show how important this is in silver. Okay, so here's the 78 level. Okay, look how it's playing with it. Once it got back above it, it held it, and we rallied to new highs into Friday, and then came off a bit. We get back under 78, that really opens a door. And when you look at this advance, and I've been negative for about 3 weeks since we last talked, and there have been some breaks and there's been some rallies, but when you compare this as a risk-on move compared to what the S&Ps did,
Yeah.
compared to a lot of other asset classes that went, straight line, I have to consider silver being a pretty weak rally. And what reinforces it is I'm bullish the gold silver ratio, which I'm looking for the 80s before it's over, which implies that the downside is going to be much more dramatic in silver, even though in gold, here's another line that it has been a great pivot line. Look at this. It's here, breakout here, failed here. So we gapped lower. All we did was get back to resistance. It's still my contention that before it's over, and maybe it's during eclipse season or prior, that we'll still see gold under 4,000 towards 3,800. So again, very key resistance levels. This was more impressive than silver, and gold should hold up better than silver if I'm right about the gold silver ratio breaking out and then trading up towards 80. So those are, more of a preferred short for me than stocks.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the gold silver ratio. I think, I, if you think about really structurally, the move that the US equity markets made is specifically the NASDAQ, right? The NASDAQ was consolidating since late October, early November.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that when it would break out, we would see, a big move as opposed to the metals were going parabolic into January.
Right.
And so it makes sense to me that the strength rotated into the NASDAQ and the US equity markets right now. I'm actually long the gold and silver and copper actually off those lows. back there from
Oh,
like,
here,
yep.
the
Um,
end of March.
and
Okay.
yeah, just I got in just like maybe that red candle a few days later
Okay.
on the pullback. I posted it. We've been tracking that in my Discord. But and
Don't you
my
feel and sometimes you have to be long, and even though you're making money,
yeah,
doesn't it feel like you want to give it a little push
yeah.
to get it to go?
Well, I mean, you it figure that the range is the most likely scenario, but what was interesting is that my analog on gold is purely directional. And so on the weekly, and that's what I was positioning for because it was such a low risk. In trading,
Yeah,
it's like you just have to take advantage of the opportunities, even if you don't know if it's going to follow through, right? Because it was so low risk. So it
yeah,
was
you
like
never.
if it's going to make a bull break, I want to be in,
Yeah,
and if not, then nothing ventured. I mean, nothing lost if you take a little partial, like you always teach, partial probe partials,
yeah, yeah.
right? So take some partials and get risk free, and then see. And overall, I think my outlook on gold is I do think gold is due to be stronger than silver over the next few months, but we'll see. Gold's due to make a decision about its direction here in the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's definitely interesting.
I'm sure that the dollar is going to have something to do with it. But like on your gold trade,
Mm-hmm.
the best trades are where you're doing it right near an inflection point because you have lower risk on the trade, right? The
Yep.
trade is good or bad from a fairly small window of risk, of
Yep.
price risk. And we were, I think, talking about sugar um, before this pullback, but I'm piling in here.
Oh yeah, I love that setup actually. I was kind of trying to wait patiently for it to wick below support, but yeah, I
You
actually
did. We
oh,
made
it
new
is.
lows. We made new lows on Friday.
Oh, on Friday. Okay.
Yeah. So in fact, and I had this line drawn well before it, and people in my room, I said, I bought some on the 61.8 retracement, so I'm underwater on those longs. But I felt enough conviction to say, I think it'll give me a chance down here. And the reason, besides the line, is
Mm-hmm.
the weekly.
Yeah.
So here was the first drive, which was confirmed, which
Mm-hmm.
implied that after a bounce, we'd have another low, which diverged. And then we had that big rally, and now we're at new lows. And this is your second higher low in the RSI. So it's a real nice divergence, possible three drive to a bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think eventually we're going to take out this 16 level and maybe trade 18, 20, and that would still just be a retracement from last year.
Yeah, I like that setup. The food ag based ag commodities, sugar, wheat,
Still
corn,
looks good. Yeah. Yeah.
DBA. I like DBA. I've been long DBA for a while. DBA is still inside. That's the ag commodity
Right.
ETF that I've been using. Um, has been sideways. It's in a monthly squeeze. DBA is. Uh,
Okay.
and so I've just been kind of hanging out, waiting for that to break, which I do think it's going to break to the upside, but it could. I think my like kind of if you were to do an abridged version of what my take on the markets is for the next few months, my primary scenario is that we're going to see oil and ag kind of tighten up and go sideways into June, July, while we see equities move up and maybe make that blow off top we're talking about. And then I'm looking to add to my all my ag and my oil positions and energy um, as we get closer to the summer. So that's kind of my primary thesis on the longer
Okay.
term horizon.
The grains have done nothing wrong. Here's the
Yeah.
weekly on wheat. Looks like a bull flag to me. I
Yeah.
doubt the market's going to make it convenient and give people a chance to buy the breakout. Corn still looks good. Just
Yeah.
get little shallow pullbacks and then renewal of upside action. The beans look pretty good too. I mean, still in advance. You got to buy dips in and all the grains look good to me. This is an embryonic bull market in my view. So we have a super El Nino
Mm.
that could appear this summer, and I've seen El Ninos before cause very dry conditions in the Midwest, sometimes drought-like conditions. So they already had, I guess most of the U.S. farmers had enough fertilizer to plant. But we're getting crazy weather in the Midwest. They're getting freezes, and it's April. We're in the growing season here.
Yeah, we had a freeze even here. I live in the West Coast, USA, and we had a freeze even here a few days ago. It just suddenly the temperatures dropped to like 32 at night, you know?
Yeah,
Um, what's from an astro perspective, what's interesting is I started hopping into ag in earlier in the year because, and I shared with you, I wrote a report uh
yeah.
on Chiron transiting the sign of Taurus. And I've continued to study that. And really, there are some difficult aspects for agriculture that will be happening really acutely 2027, 28. And so I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the ag stuff as a longer term trade. You know, if you trade ag or, whatever, beans, wheat, that it's volatile on the daily and the weekly. I mean, you can get huge moves up and followed by huge moves down. I mean, that sugar was a great example, really, but I do think we're going to get some sustained higher prices in those commodities as we get closer to these difficult, hard aspects. We've also got a Pluto square Chiron, and that's going to be with a Chiron in Taurus. And we're headed towards for the astrofluent viewers, Saturn conjunct Chiron in Taurus as well. And for the non-astrofluent viewers, Chiron is an asteroid that is correlated to core wounds. And the sign of Taurus is an earth sign, and it's correlated to crops. And so when you see Chiron, the core wound, transiting through the sign of Taurus, historically, it's correlated with some of the biggest famines in the history of the world, actually, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
And
go ahead. Go ahead,
oh,
Margo.
I was just going to say, then when you get Saturn up there making a conjunction to Taurus or to Chiron in that sign, Saturn is cold and dry, and so it dries everything out. So you're talking about droughts and the El Nino, and that all makes perfect sense to me. Is where I was going with all that.
And one other famine that I didn't know until I read your piece on the grains, which makes me think about that we could be in that position here in the next year or so, is that you could have a famine, not because there's a shortage of crops, but because it can't be distributed,
Yeah.
which makes me think about what's happening with diesel. What's
Mm-hmm.
making me think about, I'm hearing, people that drive trucks, I know some, them complaining that they can't make money on their jobs because their customers don't want to pay their increased costs. So if things continue, so there could be a problem with distribution, not necessarily a short crop or, Oklahoma Dust Bowl. It could just be a supply chain thing that could cause grocery store shelves to be real empty.
I think that's true. And I think that actually what I expect is that we may see a combination of those things. Because if you look at the astrology, it's indicated. You can also look at Uranus through the sign of Gemini. You're talking about transportation and supply chain shortages. Well, Gemini rules transportation. So, and Uranus is the planet of disruptions, sudden unexpected shocks, right?
Yeah.
So supply chain shocks certainly, I mean, not only that, but I mean, we've been seeing that since 2020, right? That was kind of one of the big problems also that emerged after the COVID crisis. Um, so yeah, I definitely think that ag is on deck for the coming couple years, and I think we may get just some volatility over the course of this year while the equity is put in there.
So I wanted to get your view because you
Mhm.
pinpointed a potential low in the dollar, which also happened on the 17th, right here.
Mhm.
This is the euro.
Yeah.
Do you believe that this bottom in the Dixie, that bottom a little under 98, 760, is durable, and
Well,
that we should be looking to buy breaks for higher prices?
let me actually share my dollar chart because I have some pretty clear thoughts on the dollar, and it actually correlates. It correlates with the metals too, since the dollar and
Right.
metals, work together. Let's see. Let me get the dollar. Okay, so first I'm just going to roll through the weekly. So this is my weekly dollar chart, and these are the analogs, and I project these forward. These are based on prior planetary cycles, and price doesn't necessarily, it's not projecting price, it's projecting structure and direction. Okay, so you can see that we are pretty clearly running one of these bearish analogs at the moment. This is the green, which I was expecting a turn last week if we were going to get the green. And so far, we haven't turned. The analogs I always give them plus or minus 1 week. So if we pushed it forward a week, if that would give us through the end of this week. So we're in this pivotal period, kind of like I was talking about with gold too, over the next 1 to 2 weeks, where I think
Yeah.
we're really going to define our direction. The thing that stands out to me, though, as far as the red analog, because I haven't exactly been super bearish the dollar, but what actually stands out to me about this red analog is that I also use these little tags here that these identify planetary cycles. Whenever you see a vertical timeline, too, that's one of my cycles that I'm tracking. And you can see that we had the equinox was the turning point. That was the high. Right. And
Right.
then these tagged the actual high here. I don't have another pivot coming until May 11th. Now it's
Okay.
possible there's something in there that I'm not picking up. As far as this is the weekly chart, this is the weekly trend, right?
Right.
But when I posted last week, I was looking at the daily trend, and on the daily, we are the dollar runs a pretty reliable 29-day cycle. And so we are really in the time band for that 29-day cycle low. And whenever a cycle low comes in, then the next 20% of the following cycle is bullish to varying different degrees, depending on if it's going to form a bullish or bearish cycle. But within that first 20 to 25%, price will top out. And then if it's going to be a bearish cycle, it'll come down and it'll break the low of that
Right.
right?
Friday's low.
Correct. So but we haven't even confirmed this pivot, right? We haven't
No,
gotten a
we haven't.
close above that high yet. So I have been anticipating this pivot low to manifest be Friday or potentially as late as Thursday of this week. I always get plus or minus 5 days, 5 trading days on my cycle lows for the 29-day cycle. And then I look to the individual pivots to find those. And so we had the one on Friday, we have another one on Wednesday and another one on Thursday.
What I found interesting last night was that the dollar was just marginally weaker, and now it's lower with
Yeah.
the euro coming back. I have fibs for entries on that. But while the dollar was barely giving up much, they were really hitting the metals. So I like to look at what normally would have been a tailwind for metals, a weaker dollar,
Mm-hmm.
was not.
Yeah.
So I asked myself, if the metals can't perform with the dollar being weak, what's going to happen if there's a dollar turn?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And look, this is the Time Trades AI forecast. So this is the software, the timing software that I use. And so this provides non-directional, which is beige and pink. So non-directional pivots, non-directional strong move probabilities, or directional. So the blue is pivot low, and the green is strong move up. The red is strong move down, and strong move defined by a move greater than 2 standard deviation. And then the yellow is a pivot high. So the AI is favoring a pivot high, 43% probability to 29% low on the 23rd. That's this Thursday. And this is for the euro. Um,
Okay.
and And then it looks like the euro, it favors a little bit of downside, but then it looks like we get a lot more upside going in the euro here once we get into early May. So that does favor more downside in the dollar, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I could be wrong about this low. I'm still going to attempt it.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that could drive it that people really aren't paying attention to is what's happening in TLT in the 10-year.
Mm,
And I just if you pull up TLT,
got it right.
you have a bear flag that's been going on for about
Let me
two
hide these.
weeks. It shows up a little better maybe on my stuff. I don't
Let me
see
hide these things. There we go. Yeah, that's the weekly. So that's the
Okay, so maybe go to a daily
daily. Yep.
for the bear flag. There
There
you
you go.
go. All right, that to me that's flagging action. Some people could say it's a bottom, but the bonds had a few different reasons to go. They didn't perform during risk off. And then Friday, when crude broke $12 on the straits, on the news of the straits being reopened, they didn't make much hay out of that either.
Yeah.
And a fundamental reason, and I'm much more of a price action guy, but I interview people like you because I learn and I respect, and it helps me if I have confluence with different methods like you talk about. But Hank Paulson, who guided the market through the 2008 collapse and bailed out the banks, really, hasn't doesn't come out and talk a lot. He's been retired for a long time, but he said that the Fed and the Treasury should have a break the glass emergency operation ready for when the bonds go no bid to
Mm,
support the bond market. And if you look at this as being a flag and call the flagpole a bear flag from 90 to
hmm
85, if we break down now this little minor uptrend it's been in, the flag line, which we almost did Thursday, that measures about 82. And then this whole thing that you're showing in your whole chart is another big bear flag. If you go to the weeklies, then uh, you have a bear flag for what's been going on for a long time, and that actually measures new lows.
Yeah, that is, let's see, gotta get the,
Well, look, you have it at 76. That would be new lows.
let's see, I gotta move that down after it gets adjusted for, okay, there we go. So that's 74 would be new
Yeah,
lows now.
new low.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think that's going to drive the dollar. That's what's going to be behind the dollar rally and behind the precious metal break yields.
If I look at so I actually think that bonds are going to break down before they break up.
Yeah.
But I actually think bonds are going to make a big rally, maybe beginning in the Q4 of this year or even Q1 of next year. From the eight, that's based on my 8-year cycle studies.
Okay.
But but before that happens, we're due for a 29-month cycle low. Bonds are on a 29-month cycle. So that 29-month cycle low was due March 9th, 2026, but a 29-month cycle gets a pretty wide orb because you always use 1/6 of the cycle. So it gets basically a 5-month orb.
Okay.
I don't think that low's in yet. And
Yeah.
so these are my analogs. And if you take a look, let's see, this one doesn't look like it's the one. So we've got green and we've got red, but both are pretty range bound on the weekly as through August. Like it doesn't look like bonds are going anywhere very fast in August. And then honestly, my preferred path would be this red here. It would be tightening range through the summer, draw down into Q3, Q4, where we get a big buying opportunity before a big move up. And maybe that just makes a double bottom,
Yeah.
maybe.
And maybe that coincides with the top of the S&Ps and NASDAQ.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Because in 87, and I watched it, yields were skyrocketing, but the market kept going. They call it disintermediation.
Hmm.
And it could go on for quite some time until yields get to a point where the market snaps and then the bonds have a huge rally. So
Mm,
I've seen this historically where the market can rally with rates still moving up. And that's what causes, and that's, in 87, we were in a speculative market before that. And they're buying things that were bankrupt, like that sneaker
mm-hmm.
company. What is it, Margo, that's made out of, I don't know, cotton? They're cotton sneakers, or, I forgot the name of the company,
Can't
but
remember the name of it, but I know what
well,
you're
they're
talking.
they're just switching their business from selling sneakers to GPUs,
Yeah,
and stock quadrupled.
yeah,
So, we're in this environment and there'll be euphoria. So
yeah.
what I'm thinking is maybe by the summer and the eclipse windows that you're talking about, maybe that's when peace breaks out in the Middle East. The market's rallying on the hopes of peace, and maybe it blows off into peace and they
Mm-hmm.
put in some type of high. So get ready to sell peace sometime this summer.
Selfies.
Yeah, that's
Seriously.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's interesting. On the topic of the Middle East and peace, I pulled up some interesting charts.
Oh yeah, I want to see those.
Yeah, so here is this is I put together three uh three natal charts. So I took the United States Sibley chart, which is just it's just one of the United States July 4th charts. And then 1776 from or the Declaration of Independence, basically. I took the Iran natal chart. That's like the birth of Iran and the birth of Israel, and I put them together. And look at
Wow.
for the non astro fluent, there's just so many fascinating things about this that stand out to me. But there's this huge group of planets together, which is called a stellium, and this is a midpoint chart. So this is when I take all those charts and I put them together, and you get one, two, three, four, five planets in the eighth house, and the eighth house is well, they call it sex, death, and the occult. um,
Okay.
Essentially, it's um,
Dark,
yeah,
dark.
it rules deep, deep, deep esoteric events and experiences. It's also the house of soulmates in mundane astrology, right? In financial astrology, it's the house of taxes, leverage, debt, other people's money, inheritances. All very deep interrelational things, right? And that's what happens when you put all three, Iran, the United States, and Israel together. You get Venus, Sun, Mercury, and Mars all in the eighth house, and amazingly, in the sign of Gemini. And Gemini is where the planet Uranus right now is about to make an ingress. And so I pulled up the chart. This is in the AstroTail macro episode that we did. I talked about this week kind of being what I call like a hot zone, right? Like in astrology, when I look at in financial astrology, when I look at each month, what I notice is that there's typically a hot zone of clusters of events that will oftentimes affect the financial markets. And we're inside that hot zone. It really began with that new moon on the 17th, and it runs through the Uranus making its final ingress into the sign of Gemini. Uranus is this planet, this symbol here. Uranus is an outer planet that moves very slowly. It has an 84-year orbit. And so that
Wow.
means it spends about 7 years in each sign. And when Uranus makes its ingress into the sign of Gemini, it has a very strong correlation in the history of the United States with the U.S. involvement in major wars. It's
Oh,
correlated to World War II, to the Civil War, and also to the Revolutionary War. So that's very poignant that it's how it's affecting the United States. But then the fact that when you put all of those all of the three natal charts together, you get this composite set of planets in Gemini. Uranus is going to be transiting for the next 7 years over the composite Iran, Israel, United States stellium. And so, well, I guess it ends at 15 degrees Gemini. So it's actually for the next 3.5 years, if we get really precise, right? And so that's pretty notable. And so when I look at this conflict, I don't necessarily think it's coming to an end quickly. I've also in my Discord, I have posted a list of dates that seem really relevant to the Iran-Israel conflict. Other than the Uranus Ingress Gemini, let's see, here's the post. I've also got May 16th, and May 18th and May 30th, all as pretty key, powerful dates that are going to affect the three charts. So yeah, it is interesting. And I do think that the volatility goes on. And I mean, I would love to see peace emerge out of this deal, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that I see it coming just yet. And then, on the financial markets too, this Uranus Ingress Gemini, Uranus rules technology and innovation, and it's rules disruption as well. So it's interesting. I expect that we're going to see some major disruptive technologies emerge over the next, 7 years. But acutely, when it makes its ingress into the sign, it tends to have a disruptive energy. And so take a look at when this is happening. It's happening on the 25th at 8:51:32 p.m. That's over New York, New York City. That's okay. Friday. That's Friday night. So do you think we'll have some disruptive news over the weekend, maybe? That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Do you take into consideration that emergency meeting that Powell called with the Treasury and the banks over MSOS? I believe that program that can find a hole in security systems of everything, of banks and everything. It wasn't well publicized, but it seemed like there was a little panic about it.
I didn't hear about that, actually. Yeah. What was it called? It was called MSOS?
Well, it comes from that Anthropic. So that new program.
Yep. Okay, I did.
So the Fed and the Treasury called an emergency meeting with all the major banks over this because of their fear that this AI is not just a tool, but that on its own, it can seek out security holes in power grids and in everything. And so they only gave it, I think, 10 or 11 companies to try and use it to patch their vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. But eventually it's going to be released to the general public. So, wow. And you talk about technology and something happening Friday. They're worried about something to have that meeting.
Wow, that is, I have been tracking, they've been running these cyber pandemics since back in 2021 or 2020. And one of the stocks that I'm actually long right now is PANW, which is cybersecurity. I think cybersecurity is poised to eventually get a lot of attention, because if we start seeing disruptive technologies like that, and plus, quantum computing is a whole nother area as well that would ignite some interest in cybersecurity. But absolutely, what stands out to me also that's interesting is that this Uranus is going to make its ingress into the sign of Gemini on Friday night in the 7th house over New York City. The 7th house in mundane astrology rules partnerships, but it also rules open enemies. So that's pretty interesting. That's one of the things that makes me think that we may see more news around the Iran-Israel conflict. But also what you're talking about with the AI is fascinating because, cybersecurity is matters of more covert enemies, though, really, if you think about that, right?
Yeah. So, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Right? It definitely is.
It is interesting times. That is for sure. And then, we should wrap it up. Before we finish, we should talk about the psychedelic legislation.
Oh yeah.
Because that was pretty interesting news to me. Here, actually, I'll just pop up one more chart before we go. ATAI is the ticker that I have been tracking associated with this. And, it was making this really nice falling wedge tightening range here. And we got a big break up. So for the people following our channel who, are shorter term traders, I think there's going to be some really big opportunities in this industry as volume comes into these names. So
look at that.
Yeah, let's see. We had a big
gap.
Yep.
The cannabis gapping too.
Yep. There's
better.
MSOS. Let's see.
Yeah,
that's we almost got like an inverse head and shoulders style. Yeah. It's not exactly, but it's the psychology, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be short.
Correct. Yeah. And of course it's trading at 429. That's pretty funny, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 420, 429.
That's that. I thought maybe it might have opened at 420. No, I have a special interest in cannabis industry because I actually opened one of the first cannabis dispensaries in the state of Oregon, and then sold it a few years ago. But I have a lot of knowledge about the cannabis industry, and it's always made it kind of hard for me to, invest in any of these stocks. You can trade them all day long, but because I kind of saw inside a lot of the inner workings of some of these bigger publicly traded companies, and they didn't seem investment worthy.
Well, do you think the binary news that all the longs are waiting for, and I think the president talked about finally getting this rescheduling done by the district attorney, by the attorney general, excuse me. Do you think it's going? I mean, it's kind of in the market, but do you think it's going to have impact?
I think, if we had a federal rescheduling event, that would have a huge impact on the market. But
okay,
I don't necessarily know that it's not necessarily long-term bullish from my perspective. I think we would see a short-term massive bullish pop, but I think a lot of people who aren't inside the industry don't understand what would happen if you had federal legalization. And it's also going to depend on what kind of federal legalization you have, right? Like if they just reschedule it as opposed to legalizing it, right? Those are like just there. It's all very different. But I think at the end of the day, the end game, you've got big companies like Philip Morris and Amazon. They all have their systems ready to go. I think it's only a matter of time until marijuana becomes a commodity like corn or wheat. But I think that matter of time, I think that time horizon is like, 10 or 15, maybe 20 years out. But once we get federal legalization, it's probably only, 5, 7, 10 years on the horizon until that happens. Because
this legislation is going to give them the ability to bank. So you went through all of that without being able to bank, and you still had the taxes to pay that you couldn't write off. Wasn't 100%. That part of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a nightmare, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, so we opened our dispensary in 2013. And so at that time, there was zero banking available for cannabis. So I would go stand in line and buy money orders to pay our bills. And then eventually a state credit union here in Oregon started servicing the industry for just a mere $400 a month.
Oh, yeah, mere.
Yeah.
40 pips on euro.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But yeah, that would be huge. Banking would be huge, and proper tax dealings, because I also work in accounting now, and that's a big piece. Having to pay that added tax I mean, I will go ahead and use the word unfair.
Yeah, onerous.
It is onerous. It makes it hard. Believe it or not, there's lots of money in cannabis, but actually when you end up not getting the same kind of tax deductions as everyone else, and plus then you layer on the incredible amount of compliance administration that's required, It makes the overhead in operating a cannabis business very high.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, you've done everything.
Conversation.
I mean, I learn new things about your history every time we talk, and I've already accused you of being a Renaissance woman that, excels in many different aspects. So, enjoyed hanging with you today, Margo.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's always so fun, Dale. Do you want to tell the viewers where they can find you?
I have a Discord room. You just go to TradeGate Hub, go to the YouTube channel, and they have links there. So that's where I'm posting.
Awesome. And anybody who's interested in connecting with me, I have a Discord room as well, and the links will be in the video description below. You can also access it through Patreon if you prefer. You can follow me on X, where I also post, and I also do individual astrology readings, and you can find me on my website, margoamala.com. All right, everybody.
And I've had a reading.
Indeed. It was very good.
So it's great intelligence gathering with you, Margo.
It's so good. Awesome. All right, everybody. Don't forget
week.
to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye.